Good afternoon, everyone. So welcome to what is our penultimate episode of the LD EduChat series for summer 2021. We're going to be talking about flexible working, and obviously something that doesn't necessarily come up all too much in the education sector and how we can make that work. And we're joined by Emma Turner, who will be talking us through this and will be fielding any questions that we might have. So in terms of housekeeping, a couple of things just to be aware of. This session is being recorded and will be uploaded on our YouTube page very shortly. If over the course of this afternoon session that you have any questions or anything you'd like to kind of get some more ideas on, you'll see at the bottom of your screen you've got a Q&A tab that will allow you to then pose any questions to Emma, and she'll be able to pick those up and field those at the end of her explanation of bits and pieces. I'm going to welcome Emma to the stage now. So Emma, if you're able to ping your camera on, perfect.
Hello.
Hi Emma, how are we doing?
I'm very pleased I've managed to navigate that. So hello.
Yeah, excellent. So firstly, massive thank you obviously for joining us today. I know that obviously for a lot of people it's getting to that time of year where things are kind of wrapping up and we're so forth. So really pleased you could be here. I don't want to say too much. I'm going to let you take over the show and kind of talk us through everything that you've got. Obviously, we've got on the slides your book and contact details. Obviously, if you want to get involved in Twitter or contact Emma, then please feel free to take note of those details. But without much further of a hold up, I'm going to pass over to the reason we're here for Emma.
Thank you. Right, so hello everybody. As it says on there, my name's Emma Turner and I've been in primary education now for 24 years. I don't like to say that out loud. I'm still trying to dine out on the fact I'm 35, which I'm very clearly not. But I'm coming on tonight to talk about flexible working, to do a little bit of kind of myth busting, a little bit of a focus, a bit of a spotlight on what we mean by flexible working and how we can use it to best effect in our organisations. So I'm just going to start with a little statement about me, and it is this. I'm a mother of 3 small children and I work flexibly. Now you may be able to hear them at some point as well. They're outside being bribed with CBeebies and Haribo, but if one comes in, I do apologise in advance. But it says there, I am a mother of 3 small children and I work flexibly. But when I say that sentence on occasions, lots of people don't hear and, they hear so. I'm a mother of 3 small children, so I work flexibly. And that's the first thing I want to kind of myth bust today, is that flexible working is not just part-time, it's not just for one particular demographic, and it's definitely not just about maternity. So one of the things I want you to really do today is to challenge your thinking around flexible working, your own preconceptions, your own biases, you know, who you think it might be for, how you think it might work, who might benefit from it, who's it targeted at. So it's beyond the kind of maternity cover or, you know, the maternity return from maternity or parental leave, and want you to think beyond what you know about flexible working to date. Now, you may know loads about flexible working and you may be really well versed in this area. You may be new to kind of thinking about flexible working, or you may kind of think, I know a little bit about it, but I'm not entirely sure. So hopefully I'll be able to add to your understanding and the kind of models that you could work in your organisation. The other question that people ask me is, why flexible working? Why do we need to talk about it? Why is it so important? Why is it on the agenda? Why do you need to, you know, raise the profile of it so much? Why do we have to talk about flexible working? And the answer to this that I give, when I first started talking about flexible working, I used to give lots of case studies and lots of data and research and statistics and all sorts of things. But now my answer, when people say, why flexible working? This is my answer. Why not? Why do we have a default setting of full-time at work, out of the home, at your place of work as being best? Why do we have that full-time workplace narrative default? Why do we not talk about work in a different way? So yes, I will unpack some of the thinking around flexible working, some of the research and the data and the figures, but actually, when we're thinking about flexible working, we need to stop thinking about it as the poor relation to full-time workplace-based work and start to think differently about how we utilise the skills, knowledge and experience within our workforces. Now, if you have anything to do with the Department for Education in terms of looking at workload and recruitment and retention, you may be aware of the new programme of FWAS schools, the acronym that doesn't quite sit right, I don't know why, but the Flexible Working Ambassador Schools. So flexible working is not just now kind of a little personal crusade of mine and a few other people across the sector. This is a national focus. And within each RSC region across the country, there is now a designated flexible working ambassador school. So there will be one in your RSC region, wherever you're listening in from. Now, we're the Flexible Working Ambassador School for the East Midlands and Humber, and the school that we're working out from is Kibworth Primary School, part of Discovery Trust. But in every area of the country, you will have one school who is the lead school for promoting flexible working within your area and will be your first point of contact if you want a kind of regional based advice for your sector. So you can look up the Flexible Working Ambassador Schools list on the DFE site and you can find out the one for your area. Now, I just want to show you these little pictures here. Now, there is, as we know, a mass exodus from teaching. Huge numbers of teachers leave teaching within the first few years of their career. Now, statistics vary in terms of actual figures, but it's basically 1 in 3 within the first 5 years will leave teaching. Now, that's a huge black hole in the profession, an absolutely huge black hole, which we can't just backfill with people who are new entrants to the profession, potentially NQTs. And the most worrying thing about that is if we look at those figures there, the 8.6 and the 13, and then the 24.6 and the 42, what those statistics represent are the percentages of people who work flexibly in education compared to outside in the wider world of work. Now, 8.6 and 13. 8.6 is the number of men who work flexibly within education, 8.6% of the workforce, compared to 13% in the wider world of work. And the bottom row of 24.6 and 42 is women. So women make up, 24.6% of the workforce in education who are women work flexibly, compared to 42% outside in the wider world of work. And now that is huge, absolutely huge. When you look at us as a sector, we have so much further to go in terms of offering the same kind of working opportunities that the wider world of work will offer. Now, flexible working is not a silver bullet for solving recruitment problems. What it is, though, is an offer that can replicate what people might be able to get outside education. And the biggest demographic to leave teaching after retirees is women between the ages of 31 and 40. Now, that's really worrying. Not just because it's women who potentially were just about to go into leadership or take on extra responsibility, but if you look at that as a demographic in itself in terms of experience, knowledge and expertise, women between the ages of 31 and 40, let's take women out and just look at people between the ages of 31 and 40. The likelihood is they have been in teaching for a long time. You know, if they've come in with a traditional sort of post-grad PGCE route, they're probably about 22, 23 when they come into the profession. And if they're leaving between the ages of 31 and 40, you're looking between sort of 7 and 17 years worth of experience that's walking out of the door. Now, those people who are leaving are our experienced mentors to help support our early career colleagues. They are the people who know our systems. They are the people who know our families and our communities. They are the people who can do an assembly at the drop of a hat. They are the people who can deal with a really sensitive child protection issue, or can deal with a really challenging class on a wet Thursday afternoon. They are the people who you rely on in your system. They are the experienced practitioners, and they are just going. Now, one of the reasons often cited by people leaving in that particular demographic is the fact that the lack of opportunity to work flexibly. And as I said, flexible working is not a silver bullet. It will not solve all of the recruitment problems. What it does do, though, is provide options, and provide options for people who potentially just would have left. So in order to stem the flow, and in also to keep people in the profession, we have to look at how we recruit, how we retain, how we develop people's careers across the lifetime of their career. And also, society is changing. The way we want to work, the way we live is changing. Now, I've got some little pictures there. And the bottom left is Lee, who works in our trust, and he looks after all of our wraparound care. He organises in all of our 13 schools, all of the breakfast clubs, the after school clubs, the holiday clubs, everything. It's Lee's job to make sure that the children are in school and cared for before school and after school and during the holidays, so that their adults who they live with can access work or study or whatever it is they need to do. We are working really hard in schools to provide the facilities to facilitate people outside of education to work, but we are not necessarily looking with that same lens and thinking, how can we invest in ensuring that we enable our really skilled, trained professionals to remain in teaching and to work in a way which supports them and allows them to continue to contribute to our organisation. We also know that we want more flexibility around potentially where we work, being able to work from home, not being sort of chained to school between the hours of 8 and 6 and having to clock in and clock out and being micromanaged in terms of your time, but actually having the opportunity to do things like PPA at home, or if you've got a big piece of data work or curriculum writing, not to have to come into the building, recognising that as trained, trusted professionals, we can turn a job of work in on time and not have to be on site in which to do it. We also recognise that people's lifestyles don't necessarily fit with a 9 to 5 or 8 to 6, whatever you want to look at it, narrative. They have other commitments in their life. They have children that they want to see at tea time and bedtime. They have elderly relatives they want to care for. They have studying that they want to do for additional qualifications. And so when and where people work is changing as well. There's much more of a kind of a 24-hour culture. Now that does not mean being on for 24 hours. It just means that people will be spreading their work around during a period of 24 hours differently. People may want to work in the evening. I know that the way that I work a lot of the time is I work after the children have gone to school during the school day, and then there will be a period between sort of 3:30 and about 7 where I don't really do very much work. I'm looking after the children, I'm having time with my family. Then when they've gone to bed, I will get my work done or whatever it is I need to do. I still do my full job of work. I organise it slightly differently. And what we don't offer enough is the opportunity to do that within education in many, many different roles. That's allowed to be done in lots of other workplaces. Now, interestingly as well, because of the pandemic, it's all been in the news as well about changes to recruitment and retention and the national picture. So as it's the NEU survey there about people saying that workload is one of the reasons that 35% of teachers leave within 5 years. And the Forbes article is talking about, the biggest number of teachers to leave. We're reaching a peak of people leaving. What's interesting though, is if you look at entrance into ITT, into initial teacher training and initial teacher education, those numbers are going up, which brings me back to this idea of our experienced practitioners leaving is a real disaster then, because who is going to mentor this increased number of early career professionals who want to enter teaching? There's also the bigger picture of post-COVID working. There are so many people now who have recognised that we need to and want to work. There is a need and a want to work in a completely different way. And this BBC report about 50 big employers said over 1 million people may never be returning to the office or not returning to the office full time. Now, if that option is available outside teaching, we have to look at what our offer is within teaching to make teaching an attractive, workable profession. And I'm going to throw something into the mix now about flexible working, in that I absolutely hate the term flexible working. I can't stand it. It drives me insane. I prefer flexible living, because this is what we want to do. We want to live well and work is part of our life. It is not our entire life. So when we say flexible working, we are putting work front and centre. What we really need to do is see work as a part of our kind of broader life and lived experiences. And the reason I say flexible living as well is because it's an absolute nonsense to expect somebody to come into the profession potentially in their early 20s and leave at the retiring age, which I think is about 96 now for teachers. No, it's you know, for an entire career span of multiple decades. It is really naive to think that we could possibly work in exactly the same way, in exactly the same patterns from when we enter in our 20s to when we leave in our 60s, and all of the things that we may navigate in our lives throughout that, to which we'll need to be responsive, both in terms of the way we live our life and also the way that we work. Now, those things that we respond to may be that we want to do additional study. You know, we want to do a master's, we want to do a doctorate, maybe we want to set up a business or a consultancy. There'll be another element of something that we want to do. Maybe it's because we need a period of leave or an adjustment for maternity or for parental leave. Maybe it's because we're caring for an elderly relative, or it may be that we have a health challenge of our own. It's really crazy to think of a career as full-time, all the time, forever. There has to be an opportunity to live flexibly within our career paths. And this full-time default, this constant full-time default, means that when people request flexible working, we have what I call the Oliver Twist scenario, which is in Oliver Twist, when Oliver walks up and he says, "Please, sir, can I have some more?" We have this ridiculous situation in education where we feel like we have to go up and sort of go, "Please, sir, can I have some less?" And then we have to explain our personal circumstances and our personal situations, which may be intensely private and intensely challenging. Whereas what we need to recognise is that people's lives are messy and difficult and unpredictable, and we need to have a structure in which people can respond to that, still contribute to the organisation, still develop as a professional, and still be able to live really well. So flexible living is about the culture and the approaches that you develop in your organisation to enable your employees within your organisation to feel that they can contribute, they are valued, and that they can live flexibly. Now, there are some new definitions that the Department for Education has brought out. So when you're looking at flexible working within education, the most up-to-date guidance is this. There are three main strands of flexible working that the Department for Education has identified. One is around part-time working, one is around varied hours, and one is about in-year flexibility. Now, I think these definitions are really useful and really important because they overtly state that this is not just for part-time. We now recognise that flexible working is for all workers, regardless of their contracted hours, whether they're working part-time on a 0.2 contract all the way up to full-time. There needs to be an overview and an addressing of flexibility for workers on all contracts. Now, part-time working is interesting in that it's divided into part-time, job share and phased retirement. Now, part-time and job share are often lumped in together, but they are completely separate. Part-time is a job of work that needs doing in your organisation that adds up to less than a full-time role. Job share is a job of work that needs doing that is a full-time role shared between two or more people. Now, in my trust, I work in a part-time role. I work for part of the week and I have specific projects which only I do. That's my part-time role in our trust. We have other people in our trust. We have co-head teachers who job share a role. It's a full-time role but shared between two or more people. And I think that if you are in a position in your organisation where you're setting staffing structures or thinking about workforce kind of remodelling or reform or restructure, looking at that really carefully can provide you with the space to do so much kind of innovation around recruitment. Because actually what part-time does is says to you, right, okay, let's look at the actual work that needs doing in this organisation. And rather than shoehorning people into historical kind of definitions of roles like head teacher, deputy head, teaching and learning lead, key stage 2 lead, key stage, you can actually think, what needs doing? Let's create a role around the work that needs doing and match that to the expertise that's available in our talent pool. So rather than thinking, oh, I need another deputy head, well, actually, what work do you need doing? Who could you attract into this role? How many people could do it? Is one person right for this role, or could it be a job share? So understanding the opportunity for innovation when we're looking at part-time work and we're looking at flex can be hugely beneficial for your organisation. Varied hours then include staggered hours, where your hours are spread over the course of a number of days across the week. And actually that's what I do in my trust as well. I do part-time staggered hours. So my contract is spread over the whole week, which enables me to work really flexibly. Compressed hours is obviously where it's like long shifts basically. So you may have a 0.8 contract, but actually you do that over 3 days, or you do 3 days in school and then some other parts of it elsewhere. The in-year flexibility is the one where loads of work needs to be done, because in-year flexibility is where it often incorporates your full-time workers. So giving time off in lieu, if they've been potentially on a residential or done some extra work or attended something. School policies on family days or personal days. There is so much work needs to be done around this within the full-time space. And then home or remote working. So allowing people to do the same work, but elsewhere away from school. So if you look at DFE now, you will see that these definitions are there, and these are the ones going forward that the FWAS schools will be using as well. The other thing I wanted to talk about was about full-time privilege. Now, I've said about full-time default, but there's also an element that we need to be aware of around full-time privilege. People look at me a bit gone out when I say this. It's like, what are you talking about, Turner? What are you saying? Well, actually, working full-time for a lot of people is something they would love to do, but just can't for one reason or another. Now, that may well be that they have prohibitively high childcare costs. And just as an example, when my 2 eldest children were both in nursery, for 2 days a week for 2 small children, I was paying nearly £900 a month just for that amount of childcare. Now, if I'd have had to pay that for 5 days a week, there is no way I could have paid that. I could not afford to work full time. It would have been a privilege to go back to work. I couldn't afford it. Also, there are people for whom they may have a health challenge, be that a physical health challenge, mental health challenge, where they can offer great resources and expertise to the organisation, but they need to do that in fewer hours or in a different way. Same again with people who may have a caring commitment for an elderly relative or a spouse. You know, they may have great skills to offer, but they just cannot offer that in a full-time role. So it's being mindful that when we offer our work out, whether that be in advertising or recruitment materials, or the way that we phrase things on our websites, actually, are we saying, or are we putting out there that we believe in a full-time narrative default, and that actually we are accidentally privileging full-time? Because the more people we can invite into our organisations with the more or the bigger range of diverse lived experiences, the richer our organisations will be. And if we are only inviting people into our organisations who can work full-time, you know, who haven't got a wish to pursue a doctorate or set up as a consultancy, or, you know, they haven't got very small children with astronomical nursery fees, you know, they haven't got mental, physical health challenges, they're not carers, you know, all of these people potentially couldn't come into our organisations if we're not proactive in saying, we welcome you, we will look at flexible working, we will look how we can utilise your skills. Or are we just having this kind of full-time privilege, full-time narrative? A little bit of myth busting as well around flexible working. The first one is that it's an issue with parents. Parents won't accept it. Well, I started in my first co-headship back in 2008-9, And my co-head teacher and I were steeled, we were ready, you know, we were going to bat off kind of fend off every complaint and query that came our way, and we had the grand total of 0. Absolutely none. And everybody I speak to who's in kind of co-headship or co-leadership setups say that actually the parents are genuinely overwhelmingly accepting of this. And a lot of it, I think, is potentially because people are used to working in the wider world of work, where job sharing and part-time working is so much more common. People see it in their own lived experiences a lot of the time, and we are actually a bit slow to catch up in terms of education. Interesting as well, when we took on the co-headship, the biggest criticisms or the biggest kind of raised eyebrows that we got were from other education established leaders who said, how does this work then? It wasn't from the people who we expected it from. And from talking to other co-heads and other co-leaders, that does seem to be a very similar pattern. The resistance is from the inside, not necessarily from the outside. Then there's the idea about pay. You know, it's really difficult to work out flexible pay. It's really difficult to work out, you know, job shared pay. Actually, it's really straightforward. When Claire and I set up the co-headship all those years ago, there wasn't even a drop-down menu for co-head teacher. Payroll, like, how do we do this? And then within the co-headship, within 8 years of being co-heads, we also had between us 5 babies within 5 of the 8 years. So we had kit days, we put our days up, put our days down. There was every single way of flexing that pay. And there is a very, very, very different message between computer says no and senior leadership say no. Actually, our computer and payroll and accounting systems are very agile, very nimble, very adaptable. And so when we're thinking about pay, is what we're saying computer says no, or is it senior leadership say no? So pay can be a little bit of a red herring. Timetable as well. Now, I'm not a secondary teacher, but I worked with a lot of secondary teachers when I wrote my book on Flex. And the bottom line from senior timetablers from across the country in multiple sectors, multiple size schools, including sixth form, was that actually, if you want to make it work, you can. Yes, it can be a little bit of a headache. Yes, it's an added dimension. But one of the other things it also puts in is flexibility, because within your timetable, there's nothing more rigid and inflexible than everybody full time. If you've got quite a few people who are part-time or who work flexibly, you've got that opportunity to flex your own timetable as well. And one example that was given by a very senior timetabler in a big school was that actually he one year just needed an extra 2 hours of science teaching, one particular year for a particular cohort. Now, ordinarily, he would have had to go out and do recruitment and get somebody in to do that. But actually, because he had lots of part-time staff within the science department, he just asked, is there anybody who would like an additional two hours of science teaching a week? And he managed to cover that. So it's bearing in mind that, yes, flexible working can throw an extra organisational logistical dimension to timetable, but it can also provide solutions as well. The other one about needing one person in charge. I love this one because it's got a really simple answer. If anybody challenges having more than one person in charge, especially for a leadership role, the answer that I come back with after I've done the whole, yes, but it's double the skill, it's double the experience, it's double the expertise, it's double the opportunity for your children to tap into multiple people, is the very simple message that most children, well, an awful lot of children in this country live in a household where there is more than one competent, capable adult. What we don't say to those families is, do you know what would be better for that child? Is if one of you left and said there was just one person in charge, please. Thank you. You know, children are used to working with multiple adults. In foundation stage, they have multiple key workers, not key workers, they have multiple practitioners within their setting. When they move to high school, they have multiple teachers for multiple lessons. Nothing magical happens in the interim years in primary where they need one person. And same for being in charge. A really well crafted co-headship provides support, it provides robust peer challenge, it provides double the expertise and experience. It's really a really strong model. And then too many part-time already. Part-time is not chlorine in a swimming pool. It is not okay up to a certain level and then becomes toxic after a while. When I left my previous school, by the time I left, 75% of all staff were part-time. It is doable. It does throw up challenges around communication and working in teams. It's a cinch now. I wish we'd have had the digital capabilities that we have now back then, because a lot of the issues that we were coming across could be solved easily with a Zoom or a Teams or some kind of watch back facility. But it is a real myth that too many part-time, what it boils down to, it's about communication is tricky. That's what we're really saying. When we're saying there's too many part-time, we're saying communication is tricky. Now that's just a little timeline, which is really only of interest to my mother, but this is my professional timeline. And the reason I put this up is to show that the blue parts are where I worked full-time and the yellow parts are where I worked flexibly. And I had my first child in 2011. So I'd worked flexibly in education pre-children. And a lot of people think, oh, you only went flexi when you had the kids. No, I've worked flexibly pretty much the bulk of my career. And I've done it in multiple posts, both class teacher, deputy, head teacher, and then across a mat, as I do now. And one of the reasons I put this up there is because you'll notice on the bottom right-hand column at the very end of the timeline there is the longest list of things that I do now. And the reason I can do that massively long list is because I work flexibly. And what that does, it means that every other little job I do, I bring back all the knowledge and skills from all those other jobs into each other. There is a cross-pollination, a cross-fertilization of knowledge and skill and expertise. So another thing that's great about part-time or flexible working, it allows people to work elsewhere. And I was talking to a school business manager the other day who said, I work across 3 schools and I've never thought about this. She said, the things that I learn in one school, with my school business manager hat on, I then take into another school and then I've never thought of it. I am an asset to my system, aren't I? And I was like, yes, you are, because you're working in multiple posts. When people work in one organisation full-time, that's potentially their lens. Multiple flexible workers who are potentially working in other areas of the sector are bringing in that knowledge and expertise. So it's just another reason why flex can be so useful for organisations. The other thing about flexible working is about what's called rigid flexibility. Lots of people say, we do flexible working here. Yeah, we do flexible working. What they mean is we do one sort of flexible working. We do job share in class teaching. That's what we offer. And you can do a Monday to Wednesday and a Thursday and Friday. That's our flexible working. Flexible working, although you need a policy in your school or your organisation, an agreed approach so that it's fair, it's transparent, it's open, and there's parity across it. What we shouldn't have is this kind of tug of war. We shouldn't have employee versus employer, backwards and forwards. Oh, I want this. No, you can't have it. Flexibility and flexible working is about communication, which is why I've got that little coiled phone cord there. Because actually, every single flexible working request, and I don't like the word request because it's the Oliver Twist bowl, but every flexible working case needs to be communicated really clearly between the person asking for the request and the person who will be in the position to grant that request, because everybody's circumstances are different. When we go back to that flexible living slide, when we think about people's lives being messy and complicated, the things people will be asking for are always going to be slightly different. So we need to keep those lines of communication open and be really proactive in saying, talk to us about what you would like to offer and what we can potentially offer in return, not having this tug of war. And one of the huge things I come up against in the flex space is people not knowing what's on offer. You know, and I liken it to when somebody wants to work flexibly, they don't know the range of flexible working options that are open to them. And it's a little bit like walking into a restaurant, not being given a menu and only having to kind of guess what you could have based on what other people at other tables are eating. And that's our flexible working landscape for a lot of people. You know, they think the only thing that's on offer is a job share, class teacher, 0.6, 0.4. Or they think that they can't come back in a leadership post because that's just not what happens. What we need to do is be really proactive about showing those menus and going, right, okay, well, we could do this or this or this or this or this. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And throwing open that menu when we're having performance management discussions, appraisals discussions, whatever you call them in your organisation, when we're having reviews of, around maternity or paternity or shared parental leave, actually being proactive and saying, this is the whole menu. Don't make assumptions about what's on offer because there's probably a lot more offer than you think. And so partly it's about educating leaders to think differently about the opportunities within flexible working, but also educating the entire workforce about what options are there, giving them the menu. Patchwork flexibility I've mentioned already, about the fact that this is how I work. You know, I do multiple different things across the sector, and every single one of them is like a little square on that patchwork picture there. Each one of them comes back and enhances the overall picture. You know, by being a flexible worker and working in, you know, ITT, I also work in the flex space. I do a lot of work around cognitive science. I do an awful lot of work about middle leadership development and curriculum, but all of those bits feed into each other. And I wouldn't be able to do that in a traditional role either. Now, as I say, it is a national thing. It is on the national agenda. So we've got the DfE Flexible Working Ambassador Schools, but also with the DfE are putting out a series of webinars as of next academic year for head teachers, school business managers, governors and trustees, all around flexible working. So nationally, there is a webinar rollout, which you can keep your eye out for, run by TimeWise, but for the DfE. And then there is the localised support, the regional support by your Flexible Working Ambassador School. This is a huge project nationally to promote flexible working. Flexible working isn't going anywhere. You know, there is huge work going on behind the scenes at regional and national level to promote flexible working in our schools. And as you move into next year, you'll start to see a lot more of this highlighted everywhere. And it's because it has so many benefits. There is the benefit of retention. If we can offer people ways in which they can continue to work and contribute, we're likely to keep hold of them. We also know that when people are working in a flexible role, they are much more likely to stay. The only caveat to that is we need to make sure that we keep an eye on that and they're not only staying because they don't think they can get flex elsewhere. We don't want to accidentally lock people in a gilded flexi cage because they don't think they'll get that offer anywhere else, or they're not getting the appropriate CPD to be able to enable them to go elsewhere. But it does help with retention. It's flexible. You know, I talked about Claire and I upping and downing our days, depending on which one of us was off on maternity leave at the time. But having flexible workers is flexible. Flexibility is not forever. You know, you don't sign in blood that you're only ever going to work for 3 days for the rest of your entire career. You know, this is a short period of time, and in a lot of cases, and we need to, as school leaders, start getting beyond the short-termism view of flexible working as being, oh, this is really difficult to actually organise, and think, do you know what, this is a chance for me to hold on to somebody really brilliant, to develop them over the next few years and to hopefully move them into their next stage of their career really well. And they can provide that flexibility for you if you need an extra afternoon or an extra day. You know, it's not forever. People's circumstances change. Succession planning is a huge one. You know, you may have somebody in your school who wants to step up, but they're not quite ready, or they don't feel they've got the full skill set, or they haven't got the confidence, or they need mentoring into the role. So that succession planning and mentoring model is a great one for flex. And I've seen it used brilliantly where somebody's deputy or head for 3 days a week, and they are mentoring somebody into the role for the extra 2. And then that person who's doing the 3 moves on to the next phase or stage of their career or their life. So succession planning and mentoring is a great one. We've also got it in our trust with NQTs who job share with an SLE in a class. So the mentor gets great support from the NQT gets great support from the SLE, but the SLE only works there part-time because they're off doing whatever it is they're doing. So it's great for mentoring. Innovation, you can create brilliant roles within your organisations by looking at flexible working. I don't know anybody else who does my role in any trust in the country, but my CEO thought, right, this is a body of work that needs doing. You know, we need somebody who can do this, 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 and this. I applied for the role, I was really lucky and got it, but they've got a really innovative role now in their trust. It's a really agile role, but that's because he had the foresight to think about what that might look like. Well-being, if I need to explain this one, it really is really straightforward. If people can continue to contribute in a way that balances and fits with their commitments and their aspirations outside work, they will be happy in the workplace. Overworked, stressed, overtired, burnt out people are not productive or happy. If people can work in a way that works for them, great, well-being will go through the roof. Diversity I've mentioned about inviting people into the organisation. The full-time privilege and the full-time default can prevent a lot of people from applying to positions, especially leadership positions. We've got to be really proactive about advertising and encouraging leadership as to be seen as doable, as flexible, and to invite more people from a more diverse range of lived experiences into leadership. Efficiency, I've kind of alluded to all the way through, that actually recruitment is expensive, advertising is expensive, induction is massively expensive in terms of times and potential dips in as you get people up to speed with things. You know, induction, recruitment and advertising are expensive, labour intensive. Holding on to people is a really efficient way of moving your organisation forward. I don't mean forever, I don't mean having the same team for 15 years and going a bit stale. I mean just not constantly having this revolving door of people leaving. And cross-pollination I've mentioned as well. So that's kind of a whistle-stop tour really through Flex. I could talk for hours about Flex, for days in fact, but that's kind of the slides that I was gonna show you. So if I stop that there.
Brilliant, thank you, Emma. I think I love some of the ideas, and it got picked up in one of the questions that's coming about the idea of not so much flexible working, but flexible living.
Yeah.
And looking at it from that perspective, it's kind of that living to work rather than working to live kind of idea. And I think that's a kind of really valuable point to pick up on, in the fact that remembering that actually we are more than just a body in a workplace as such. So it was really good. I mean, seeing all of the different aspects of what flexible living looks like as well, rather than just that narrow mindset of part-time and job share as such as well. So we have got a few questions, and they're sort of varied as well. So we've got we'll go for one which I think is kind of a curveball as such in some respects. I'm not trying to catch you out here. So as a newly qualified teacher, so Ian's asking, as a newly qualified teacher, how could you approach and set the expectation that you might want to live flexibly from the offset, rather than it being something that's used as a retention tool in 7 to 10 years time?
In terms of applying for a new post, is this?
I assume so. I think as a newly qualified teacher, but someone who's early in their career, it might be.
Well, one of the conversations that I've been having is around the early career framework and how to access that if you want to work flexibly. So that one's kind of in the background. I'm working on that one because I've already kind of picked up the fact that the early career framework materials potentially could do with a little bit of extra flex putting in them, but it's opening up those conversations with your mentor, with your line manager, with your head teacher, because doing what we've always done isn't necessarily the right thing, and having that conversation with people and opening up and saying, could I do it this way, or with the opportunity to do it that way. There's a chapter in the book at the top which is, the title of it is if you don't ask, you don't get. And doing what we've always done historically isn't necessarily the best way, and asking the question is never a stupid question, it's never the wrong question, and opening up that dialogue, the worst thing that can happen is somebody can say no. So I would really encourage you to talk openly about you know, how you would like to develop your career. We've got lots of kind of part-time or flexi early career teachers in our trust and our wider networks. It is doable. It's about the culture in the school and the mindset of the leaders in that school or the leaders in the organisation. So it's constantly asking the questions about how could we do this flexibly? How could we do this better? Is the opportunity to do this? Is the opportunity to do that? The worst anybody's going to say is no. But what it does do is it's important to remember that if you're not the person who can press the red button and make things happen, you need to be the person who reminds somebody that there's a button there. You know, you need to be able to say, you know, I know you might not want to press it now, but it is there. Have you considered this? So being the person to ask the question and provide the prompt is so important, regardless of career stage, because otherwise we get into our kind of echo chambers of this is how it's always happened.
Yeah. I think it's kind of, in my head, I'm sitting there thinking, as you're explaining the answer, is ask to see the menu.
Yeah.
To use the analogy that you were using earlier in terms of knowing what the options and choices are, and like you say, reminding them of that red button, having that conversation and keeping that sort of dialect open.
Yeah.
I think that poses an interesting conversation and an avenue to explore. So a couple of other questions then. So one around childcare costs can be demanding, and a full-time having a full-time salary to work can be tough, although it's meant that career progression may not be interrupted in this person's particular circumstances because they've managed to maintain a full-time position. How is it that we can ensure cultures around career progression are still possible through flexible or part-time roles? And I think that's going to lead into another question that we've got as well. So
this is where appraisal and performance management is so key for leaders in schools, to make sure that they're really analysing really carefully who is it that's getting the opportunities in school. You know, are these opportunities open to everybody? Is the training accessible for people who potentially are working flexibly? You know, are the opportunities for progression into leadership or progression into other avenues, are they open to people? And being really vigilant and really mindful of what's happening in their organisations, because for some families, for some, you know, home setups, full-time is the perfect way to go. You know, my deputy, she had very small children as well. She was like, I couldn't work flexibly. I just need to be at work. I just need to work full time. It's such a personal choice, personal circumstances, personal choice. But what we can't have happen is that one way gets more privilege than the other. So we need to be really vigilant that we are looking at people, looking at skills, looking at experience and thinking, right, how can I build on what's in front of me, and making sure that if you've got part-time teachers or part-time leaders, that they are getting the same access to experience, training and development opportunities as your full-time colleagues. But that needs to be written into, this is what I'm saying about performance management, appraisal and review. Flex needs to come up as prompts on those conversations, both for employee and employer. And I understand the employer might be also the flex, because I was, but basically there is that delineation. But it's about vigilance. It's making sure that we're not accidentally privileging one group over another. Okay, so we could initiate that conversation again, I think, using that analogy of highlighting the button in those conversations. Mm-hmm. Perfect, cool. So another one from Dean Cotton. So really important to look at this through the lens of looking for a job that needs doing and matching it with skill sets rather than traditional job roles. Making sense, it makes sense, and it's highly motivational. Could you suggest of any secondary schools that can model this approach, especially at a senior leadership level, for ideas for innovative roles? Go and get in touch with Johnny Utley. Johnny Utley, who wrote Putting Staff First with John Thompson, is your guy, your go-to for secondary. He wrote the foreword to my book. He talks a lot in, I don't know, normally I think it might actually be by my bed. It's not, I'm never normally 6 feet away from his book, but he talks very much about innovation and staff development, especially at secondary, because his trust is predominantly secondary. But it's about, again, just being really clear about what actually needs doing in schools and not having that default to kind of what's been done before. But there are lots of kind of innovative secondary practices out there, you know, Sam Strickland, Johnny Utley, just to name two, that are really starting to look at actually what's the job of work that needs doing, rather than, you know, oh, we need another VP, we need another AP. You know, the tide is starting to turn. Also, the flexible working ambassador schools, there are lots of them. there are 6 that are secondary. So there's only 2 flexible working ambassador schools that are primary. The rest are all secondary, and they are pushing out loads and loads of models about innovation in secondary recruitment and retention.
Perfect. I think it's great to sort of reflect and look and see that tide turning. I think that one thing that I know from personal experience is that the pandemic shifted that sort of culture, because people have perhaps had a bit of flavour of working at home and having that option of flexibility. Yeah. And I think technically we now have the capabilities within our digital technology to actually facilitate that as well. So I think that's probably...
And one of the things that the pandemic literally did shine a light on, like a Zoom light on, was the fact that when people were working from home a lot of the people who don't necessarily always benefit from flexible working, who were potentially in leadership positions already, literally saw what people were dealing with at home in the background. They saw the small children, they saw the elderly relative, they saw the 7 dogs jumping around, you know, they saw what, and it's changed the way we view workload as well, because when we're saying to people, oh, I'm just going to ring her, it's not her working day, but I'll just give her a call, or, you know, I'll just send that email now and ask for them to just respond to it. They know now what, you know, they've literally seen people's front rooms and kitchens and children in some cases, and it's really shone a light on the fact that we need to kind of have whole scale change of the way we work, both full-time, part-time, remotely, in school, because people's lives have been kind of front and center, literally on screen. And it also showed a lot of, and I've had a lot of conversations with people who found it very difficult to work at home with small children, who had been historically expecting me to be on the line answering emails, things on my inverted commas days off, because if you've got small children, it's not a day off. And they kind of realised that actually flexible working, although it needs to be flexible, there does need to be some structure around it, because we can't ask people when they're not contracted to work if they're busy dealing with the life part of their flexible living.
Yeah, I think it's crucial to, I think, like you say, that really has been apparent. And I think both in terms of staff, but equally students as well, having seen the vast majority of ways people are having to sort of get through the day, so to speak, and still maintain a full-time functioning sort of work life as well. So I'm just going to sort of give a last chance for any further questions. If there is any further questions that anyone wants to pose or ask, please feel free to put them in the Q&A down at the bottom. Sorry, and then that's all right. But you might have a question for yourself, Emma. But if you do have any questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A at the bottom. Equally, though, just to remind you, this is a recorded session. It will be up on our YouTube page fairly shortly. You can find that if you search for Chiltern Teaching School Hub, as with all of our LD Edu Chat series. And equally, you can reach out to ourselves and Emma on Twitter if you have got any further questions. So we'll give it a second. No further questions have come in, so I think we've managed to answer everything that we needed to. And you can breathe a sigh of relief now.
I was just really mindful of the fact that everyone probably wants their dinner and to go and watch the football. That's
all right. We're all good. We're all good. So massive thank you, Emma, obviously, for giving up your time this evening. Thank you, obviously, for sort of opening my eyes, and I'm sure, obviously, those watching as well, to lots of the ways we can flexibly live. I'm going to use that as a term now as well. So.
And flexible working, it's all about flexible living.
Exactly that. Brilliant. Thank you, Emma.
Very much. Thanks. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.